Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry, I was in mute. So glad to be here, shared work with people from Tel Aviv University and from Kristian Tylén from Aarhus. In particular, it was PhD, part of PhD of Maor Rosenberg. Glad to present it here. So we are interested in collective creativity, how people create together. And we recently had an amazing experience, some of us Beatles fans, to see this unique documentary. Get Back, some of you might get hooked to this. When you see on live the creative process of maybe the most important band unfolding in front of our eyes. And I think we can all agree that something about dynamics, social dynamics, and in this very unique situation. So just a snippet of this movie. If you haven't seen the 8 hours, please go and watch it if you're interested in creativity. So they're working on something later in Let It Be, wonderful song, and it's still very kind of raw. And George Harrison comes in the morning. He said, "Paul, like what's going on? I have some lyrics. Like she moved me, like she attracted me, but he doesn't get it right." And then John Lennon jumps in and said, "Just say whatever you in your head. Attracts me like a cauliflower," for example. So luckily, we didn't stay in this process. It's developed, and we are often cherish the creative product and we study the creative product, but we will agree, most of us, that there is a process leading to something as beautiful as something. And when more than one person is involved, there is things going on. And I think we don't understand enough. There is a lot of work, of course, in behavioral psychology, in organizational behavior, but I think we still lack some understanding of those dynamics, social dynamics, where help us understand how collective creativity unfolds. And if we look at classical creativity, and I'm not an expert in creativity literature, but from what I understand, many of the research is still circling back to what was developed in the 60s and the 70s, very known tests like alternative uses test, when you ask people to suggest different uses for to test divergent thinking. And then you measure things like fluency and originality. So there is a focus on the product and less on the process. And then I would argue, and I've been arguing for the last decade with some colleagues, that those tests and some other tests used in the literature are a bit suboptimal in the sense that we lack a clear understanding of where the creative process is unfolding, or to be a bit more computational, what is the underlying space. So if we take, for example, this test where you ask people to draw figures in 10 minutes over circles, it's not clear how many possible solutions there are and how similar they are to each other. So here is an example. So it's going from the left corner, someone is drawing some faces, and then after the third face, almost like this demon face, is moving to pizzas. So maybe we can speculate with a triangle leading to the pizza, but we don't really see what's going on. What is a process from exploiting a category of faces, now I can do faces, to moving to something else. So with this in mind, this is kind of an old work from my PhD from 15 years ago that we published first in 2012, so almost a decade ago. With some colleagues at the Weizmann Institute, we developed what we call the creative foraging game. So it's kind of maybe gaining some traction in the last couple of years. If you are interested, please send me an email. There is a demo here. I'll chuck it later in the chat if you want to play it. Basically, it's a computer game. It's online. It's free. You can use it. People enter some creative space, very, very small. They play a bit, and they keep some stuff that they like. So maybe they move some cubes, and they find this airplane, and then they save it. So it's very open-ended. It's try to simulate something like kids playing, or not a problem-solving task. So something very open, very playful. And the instruction we give, and we argue a lot, and other people argue a lot with this particular instruction, is look for something interesting and beautiful. You can, of course, give many other instructions like something useful, etc., etc. But what we are interested in is this open-ended creative exploration. So people go to this space, play with the cubes on the computer game, a computer board, and looking for interesting and beautiful shape that they are considered interesting and beautiful. So I would suggest that, and we suggest in a couple of papers, that it's first help us have a more nuanced look at the process. For example, teasing apart periods of exploration versus periods of exploitation, where people are saving similar shapes. There's a lot of, I would say, technical parts behind this claim. So if you're interested, let's maybe talk offline. Why do we suggest that there is a good handle here on exploration and exploitation? Quite a lot of work around this. And like I suggested, it is the very small C creative search here, not important, just a game, is happening in a well-defined space. Well-defined in the sense that we know how many solutions exist. Just mathematically, we understand there is 36 something K, 36,000 something possible shapes, and we understand how many moves, and we can get the sense of the distance, of at least the optimal distance from shape A and shape B. And people have some regularity with. So when people go to the space, to this game, they often look and search for similar categories of shape. And you might have wondered about this word foraging, and this is a coda we alluding to a very rich literature on foraging in animals, which transitioned maybe in the last 15 years, mainly with the work of Todd and Heels and quite a lot of other people, to the idea that when we do some search in the mind, in our cognitive systems, maybe we also use this information foraging. Maybe we'll also do some exploration and exploitation, so searching for staying in some area and then at some point leaving this area and moving further. And in parentheses, when we talk about creativity and creative foraging, there is something interesting there, because in regular foraging, you just want to get as many fruits or fishes in a specific location. Here, probably there is some diminishing return. At some point, I found one airplane, second airplane, in this example, in this game. It's not so interesting. I am moving on. And I'm very interested in this question. When are people moving on? And in this context, is when our diets are moving on. So some example of the exploitation phases that people, I'm still talking about individual, we'll move to that in a second. This is kind of the exploitation. We call it scavenging, just it's easier to show on the graph. So they find some shapes, or even something semantics as letters, and there is some resemblance between different people. Different participants find similar region. Many people discover digits or airplanes or animals. Any questions so far before we move on, or maybe we'll leave questions to the end? But if something is not clear, because there is quite a lot unpacked here, so feel free. I'm really good in terms of time, I think. Anyhow, a few years ago, I was very lucky to meet Kristian Tylén. Kristian is an expert. He's from Auros. He's an expert in problem solving, and he's coming from semiotic, and he's doing amazing work in a lot of domains. And I was interested in, actually, in many years, not in individual creativity, but in dyadic creativity, in particular in improvisation and movement improvisation with this mirror game works that we were working for a lot of years together. And then we kind of came together and said, can we do the CFG with two people as a creative foraging game? And Kristian came up with this wonderful setup where people are standing in front of a big screen and talking and playing the game together, which for me was a bit worrying because there is so much going on. So they are talking, stuff happens, but this is what we were studying. So two people stand in front of a screen, they look in this space of shapes for interesting and beautiful shapes. And we hope to get something about the dynamics. So very simple first thing that we did, just measure who is moving. Person A is moving now, person B. And it turned out there is a naturally occurring, maybe this is the first interesting result, a natural occurring dynamic. So if you code, if A and B are moving, you'll get a string of A, B, B. And then you can compute the probabilities that you have a move from A to B or A staying. And you can do some clustering. And lo and behold, it turned out that there is like natural occurring pairs. We don't have, it's a very preliminary result. We don't have a lot of pairs, but you have some pairs that you have one person is dominating throughout the way, just doing all the shapes and saving the galleries, or the other person is saving. So this is the dominance A, dominance B. And you have other pairs, what we call division of labors, when one person will do ta-ta-ta-ta an airplane, and then the second person will go ta-ta-ta-ta my airplane. And then finally, you have turn-taking, which is both people co-create on the same airplane or letter S. They will do tac, 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 tac. And this is a true co-creative, which is cognitively probably or computationally much more complicated. So some result differentiating these four types naturally occurring interaction in this limited setup. So just one technical slide. We measure each dot here is a participant, and for each participant, there is a tendency to explore more. So x-axis is exploring more, y-axis is scavenging more scavenging, and you can look at the polar coordinate to get a sense of how much people are scavenging versus exploring. So higher will be more scavenging, staying more in one period. And the length of the radius, again, I'm sorry, it's a bit technical, is how much are they staying in a particular scavenging sequence. So for result with the kind of classical creativity measure and something about the process. So our turn-taking, admittedly very low number, tend to explore more. So overall they do more exploration and less scavenging, less staying in airplane. They are more flexible in the sense that they are leaving an area quickly, which might be a sense of being more creative, so not getting stuck in a particular style. Interestingly, they produce less shapes. So if we often think about creativity also as being prolific, so they are less prolific. And it's interesting to know maybe there is a trade-off. Maybe just all this interaction is more demanding. And finally, they seem to be more original. So the y-axis here is fluency regarding to everyone else. So we suggest that social interaction in this very limited setup modulate group creativity. And at least with the turn-taking, we see clear results that they explore more, they are more flexible, they produce more original shape, but produce less shapes. And just as a final note, the two final notes in my last 2 minutes, I want to admit that I started very high and I ended very low, in a sense that clearly there is a big gap between two people moving some cubes on a screen and George, Ringo, Paul and John co-creating together. I think it's interesting to see if we can bridge this gap over the next decades. And finally, I just want to plug our co-worker, Alberta Rocca, that will talk in the creativity session in F24 in 350. And this is kind of a complementary work because she will present work on exploration, exploitation on two agents simulating a creative process. So thanks for listening, and I think we're good in times.